I've always believed that family was a word for love, not a word for leverage. That all changed the night I drove home to Garrison, my car loaded with groceries, and found my house dark. My name is Melissa Baker. For 29 years, I was their rock, the responsible one, the one who fixed everything. But I stood in that cold, dark foyer, my hand inches from a door, and I learned what I really was, their collateral. I heard them plotting to use my name, my credit, my entire future to pay for my brother's crimes. They said I was already on the hook. They had no idea I was listening. And they had no idea I was about to cut the line. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. If you had asked me 3 months ago what my greatest fear was, I would have said something normal like spiders or public speaking. I never would have said my family. But that was before I stood in the hallway of my childhood home with my hand raised to knock and learned what I was really worth. 3 months ago, I was just Melissa Baker, 29, a successful graphic designer and the only person in my family who apparently knew how to read a utility bill. I was on the 2-hour stretch of I-71, the landscape shifting from the ordered, upward-reaching lines of Columbus to the familiar, worn-down sprawl of my hometown Garrison. My apartment in the city was all clean lines, glass, and pale gray, a minimalist fortress I'd built for myself. Garrison was not. Garrison was my past, a place of loving, chaotic, and increasingly heavy obligations. My Bluetooth chirped, severing my podcast. I didn't need to look at the dash. It was Dad. Mel, bug you on the road. His voice was all folksy warmth, the sound that used to be my favorite in the world. Hey, Dad, yeah, about 40 minutes out. Great. Say, listen, I'm trying to get into that online banking thing. It's just not taking my password, the one you wrote down. I bit back the sigh. Did you try the forgot password link, Dad? Like we talked about? Oh, that's just a whole rigmarole. I figured it'd be faster if you just, popped in. I changed lanes, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I can't pop into your bank account from the highway, Dad, and it's not secure. You need to use the link. I was already pulling up my own banking app one-handed. While I've got you, he continued as I knew he would, your mother's prescription copay went up again. It's just highway robbery. How much? I asked, my voice flat. Oh, I don't know, 150, something like that. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him that I'd sent money for prescriptions 2 weeks ago. I just navigated to the transfer screen, from Melissa Baker checking to Mark Baker checking. Amount 150, tap, done. Thanks, sweetheart. You're a lifesaver. You know that. Yeah, Dad. See you in a bit. I hung up the silence of the car, suddenly feeling very loud. Lifesaver. That was one of their names for me. The Rock was the other. I glanced at the passenger seat. It wasn't just my overnight bag. It was 3 bags from the expensive grocery store near my apartment. Premium coffee beans for Dad, a bottle of that imported olive oil. Mom liked 2 new sets of plush bath towels because I couldn't stand the threadbare ones they used. I was the rock, the responsible one, the problem solver. I was the one who'd clawed my way out of Garrison, built a life, a career, a real future. I wore that title with a strange mix of pride and a deep grinding exhaustion. I was proud to be the one who could help. But when does helping just become enabling? When did my success stop being my own and just become the family's emergency fund? The fields finally gave way to Garrison's familiar faded streetlights. I turned onto my childhood street, the maples just starting to turn. I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in, the house my savings had kept them in for the last 2 years. A knot tightened in my stomach. The house was dark. Not just evening dark, but no one's home dark. The porch light was off. Mom always left the porch light on when I was coming home. My phone buzzed in my lap. I glanced down expecting another text from my mom asking what I wanted for dinner. It was an email from my bank. Subject payment overdue. My heart went cold. I tapped it open. Dear Melissa Baker, this is a reminder that your mortgage payment is now 30 days past due. My mortgage, but I set up autopay. I know I did. I checked it every month. A spike of pure, icy adrenaline cut through my road weariness. This was wrong. This was a mistake. I parked and got out the car door, slamming in the sudden silence. I grabbed my purse, leaving the bags of groceries, and walked up the front path. The house was too quiet. I got to the door, my hand raised to knock, and that's when I saw it. The door was already open, just a crack, and I could hear them. My family's voices, not welcoming but sharp and tense, cutting through the dark. I pushed the door open just an inch more. The old hinges, the ones I'd mentally bookmarked to oil, didn't creak. I slipped inside, melting into the shadows of the foyer. The house was cold, but the air was thick with the acrid, bitter smell of burnt coffee. It was the smell of panic. Their voices were coming from the kitchen, sharp-edged and stripped of all the warmth they saved for me. "She's not picking up." David, my older brother. His voice was a low growl I hadn't heard in years, not since he'd gotten in that fight behind the bleachers. "Look, I told you it's fine. The bank's just saber-rattling." Saber-rattling. My father's voice was thin, reedy with a terror I'd never heard from him. "David, they're foreclosing that second mortgage you took out. How could you on her house?" My blood didn't just run cold, it turned to slush. My house, I'd helped with the original mortgage, the one I'd been sending payments for, but a second one. "Stop it, Mark." My mother's voice. It wasn't the Melbug sweetness I'd heard on the phone. This was cold, hard, tempered steel. "He's fixing it. We just need Melissa to co-sign the new loan. It'll consolidate everything." A chair scraped violently against the linoleum. David laughed. It was a hollow, ugly sound. "She won't even notice. I've been signing her name on my LLC paperwork for a year. She's the personal guarantor. She's already on the hook." I stopped breathing. The floor tilted, the familiar floral wallpaper seeming to warp at the edges. Personal guarantor. The words echoed in the dark foyer, alien and monstrous. David's voice dropped, laced with a casual cruelty that stole the air from my lungs. "She has to help us, or she goes down too." "Goes down with you." He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't in a jam. He was describing a hostage situation, and I was the hostage. There was a long silence filled only by the frantic tick-tick-tick of the kitchen clock. Then my father, my dad, the man who taught me to ride a bike, his voice barely a whisper. "This is fraud, David. What we've done, this is a crime." "It's family, Mark," my mother snapping the word like a whip. "It's what you do. She's got all that city money. She'll be fine." Her voice was pure ice. "She won't let her parents be homeless." And then the final twist of the knife, the one that aimed right for my ribs. "She wouldn't want the whole town to know." That was it. The blackmail, the threat. It wasn't just about money. It was about shame. My shame. The shame they were weaponizing. I stood there, my hand still half raised from a knock that would never come. I expected to cry, to scream, to storm in there and demand an answer. But I did nothing. A strange, terrifying, icy calm washed over me. It wasn't a hot rage. It was the absolute zero of space. A camera lens I hadn't even known was blurry had just snapped into perfect, agonizing focus. I saw it all. Every forgotten wallet, every temporary loan to cover David's latest misunderstanding, every guilt trip about my apartment, my car, my life, every time I'd been their rock. It wasn't love. It was leverage. I wasn't their daughter. I was their resource, a crop to be harvested. All those years I'd been so proud, proud to be the one they could count on. I'd mistaken their dependency for affection. Their praise was just maintenance. The pride I felt, that was just the anesthetic they used so I wouldn't feel the hook. And the rock was just the thing they'd decided to hurl at the bank to keep the wolves away from their door. I didn't make a sound. I was a ghost in my own home. I backed away, my feet silent on the hardwood. One step, then another. I turned my hand, finding the doorknob. The cold brass didn't even register. I slipped out, pulling the door shut with a click so soft it was swallowed by the night. I walked back to my car. My hands weren't shaking. They were perfectly steady as I gripped the steering wheel. I put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway, and drove. I didn't speed. I drove just under the limit, my face a mask in the faint glow of the dashboard. My phone, forgotten on the passenger seat, lit up. A text. "Where are you?" from David, then another from Mom. Mom's worried, call me, the lie of it. The sheer audacity was so profound it almost made me laugh. Worried. Worried their ATM was off script. I ignored it. I drove until the streetlights of Garrison were just a dim memory in my rearview mirror. I pulled over to the gravel shoulder of the empty highway, the engine humming. I picked up my phone, my fingers moving with surgical precision. I didn't call them back. I called my bank, checked my balance, and then opened my browser. Forensic accountant, Columbus, Ohio. I clicked the first link, the 24-hour hotline one, and hit call. A woman answered. Mid-Ohio Financial Services, how can I help you? My voice was steady. It didn't even sound like mine. Hi, I need to book an emergency consultation with a forensic accountant. I think my family has stolen my identity. And the 2-hour drive back to Columbus was a silent scream. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just drove my mind a sterile operating room where I was triaging my own life. I didn't go to my apartment. I went to a 24-hour diner, drank burnt coffee, ironic, and waited for the sun to come up. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, I wasn't at my graphic design job. I was sitting in a high-backed leather chair in a glass-walled office that smelled like old money and fresh polish. My new lawyer, a woman named Anya Sharma, was all sharp angles and sharper questions. By 11:00 a.m., her recommended forensic accountant, a man named Ben, who looked more like a librarian than a financial bulldog, was staring at a screen, his quiet, oh my, more terrifying than any shout. The next 48 hours weren't a montage, they were a descent. They were a systematic, layer-by-layer excavation of my life, revealing the rot my family had hidden beneath the foundations. Anya and Ben laid it all out for me on a polished mahogany table, a funeral for a life I thought I had. The second mortgage was just the appetizer. David's LLC, Garrison Restoration, Anya said, tapping a stack of incorporation documents. He listed you as the sole personal guarantor. I never signed that, I whispered. I stared at the signature on the screen. It was a sloppy, looping forgery of my name, one they hadn't even tried to perfect. They didn't think they'd ever be caught. He's been busy, Ben said, his voice dry. He turned his laptop toward me, his face grim. He used his status as guarantor, as you, to secure not just the $80,000 second mortgage on your parents' home, but a $150,000 business line of credit. Which is fully drawn, Anya added, her voice flat. And Ben continued, clicking to a new spreadsheet that was a sea of red. It appears Garrison Restoration has a business model. He takes the 50% deposit for jobs, kitchen remodels, new roofs, patio installations, and then doesn't do the work. I just stared. The names on the list, the Millers, Mrs. Henderson, these were our neighbors, people who had known me since I was a child. He stole from them. He stole from you to steal from them, Anya corrected, her gaze unwavering. He's left a trail of furious clients who are all about to file lawsuits, and since the LLC is just a shell with no assets, they'll come after the personal guarantor. They'll come after you. I did the math in my head, the numbers stacking up like a skyscraper preparing to topple. How much in total? Ben sighed. Between the fraudulent mortgage, the line of credit, and the outstanding deposits we can find, you are personally on the hook for just over $240,000, give or take. Apocalyptic. That was the only word. This wasn't a debt. It was a crater. It was a life-ending event. They had taken my entire future, my ability to buy a house, to get married, to live, and set it on fire to keep themselves warm. What can I do? My voice was steady. Anya steepled her fingers. Legally, we can fight. We can file fraud charges, identity theft. It'll take years. It'll be your word against your family's. They will paint you as a willing participant who got cold feet. It will be ugly, public, and expensive. And in the meantime, the bank will freeze your assets. All of them. They'll seize your savings, your investments. They'll start garnishing your wages. You'll be locked in this fight and you'll be broke. So I'm broke either way, I said. It wasn't a question, it was a fact. Anya nodded, her expression grim. Essentially, but if we fight... No. The word was out before I'd even thought it. No fight. Not that way. I'm not giving them that power. I'm not letting them drag me through the mud for years. I went home. I stood in my quiet gray apartment, this life I'd built so carefully, and I saw it all as a vulnerability. The American dream I'd been chasing, the 401k I'd maxed out for 5 years straight. The diversified mutual funds, the high-yield savings account I'd so proudly named Future House Fund. But it was all a lie, an illusion. As long as they were tied to me, it was all just money they hadn't stolen yet. I opened my laptop. I sat on my floor, not on my nice sofa, and I went to my retirement account portal. Early withdrawal request. A bright red warning box popped up. This transaction is subject to a 10% federal penalty and will be taxed as ordinary income. Are you sure you wish to proceed? Am I sure? I thought of my mother's voice. She won't let her parents be homeless. I thought of David's laugh. She's already on the hook. I clicked, yes. One by one, I tore down the life I'd built. I logged into my brokerage account. Sell, sell, sell. I liquidated my stocks, my bonds, every financial victory I'd ever celebrated. I took the losses. I took the penalties. I didn't care. This wasn't finance. This was surgery. I was amputating a limb to stop the gangrene from spreading. I watched my net worth evaporate, check by jingle transformed into a single, massive liquid sum in my primary checking account. Anya had set it up for me that afternoon. An irrevocable trust managed by her firm with a name that meant nothing to anyone. It was a digital fortress legally separate from Melissa Baker Guarantor. I opened the wire transfer form. I typed in the account number, the routing number, and then the amount, all of it. My entire life savings, my future, my city money, everything. My hand hovered over the mouse. This was the point of no return. I was willingly making myself destitute. I was doing exactly what they feared I would do. I was saving myself, not them. The click of the mouse echoed in the silent apartment. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The confirmation screen appeared. Your transfer is complete. I stared at my checking account balance, $0. I felt light. And then, as if on cue, my phone lit up on the coffee table. The love bombing had begun. The trap was being set. A text from David. Hey Mel, you just vanished. We're getting really worried about you. Call me. A minute later, my mother, Melissa Ann Baker. You call me this instant. Your father is beside himself. We love you. Are you okay? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what I knew. They were testing the waters, checking to see if their rock was still in place, ready to be used. They had no idea the rock had just been dropped into the middle of an ocean they couldn't reach. My public-facing accounts were empty. The money was gone. They'd come to use me, but they'd just lost access. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady. I opened the family group chat. I'm fine, just needed to clear my head. I could almost feel their collective sigh of relief through the phone. I typed again. We need to talk. My apartment. Sunday at noon. Bring all the paperwork for the loan. I hit send. Let them think they were walking into a negotiation. Let them bring their lies and their excuses. I was ready. I was finally, terrifyingly ready. The buzzer for my apartment was a harsh metallic rip through the Sunday silence. It was exactly noon. I pressed the talk button. Yes, it's us, Mel. Let us in. My mother's voice strained with a false brightness. I pressed the unlock button and waited. My apartment was on the 4th floor, and I listened to their footsteps, a clumsy, shuffling trio ascending the stairs. They didn't like the elevator. The knock came. I opened the door. They stood there, a messy, uncomfortable unit, completely out of their element. My father, Mark, looked pale, his eyes fixed on the floor, clutching a worn manila envelope. My brother, David, tried for a breezy smile, but it was a grimace. He was assessing, his eyes darting around my living room, calculating what everything was worth. My mother, Karen, was the only one who met my gaze, her jaw set. She pushed past me, her purse hitting my side. Well, this is Gray, Melissa, she said, her first words. She ran a finger along my concrete countertop. Don't you find it cold? Have a seat? My voice was flat. I didn't offer to take their coats. I didn't move toward the kitchen to get water or coffee. The machine was off the carafe, clean and dry. They clustered awkwardly around my glass dining room table, a piece of furniture they had always mocked as pretentious. They sat, 3 of them on one side, a panel of judges. I sat on the other. Home field advantage. The silence in the room was absolute, thick and sterile. I let it stretch. I let them bathe in it. I watched my father's thumb rub a worn spot on the envelope. I watched David's legs start to bounce. Karen finally broke, her voice tight. Well, Melissa, this is a bit dramatic, isn't it? Dragging us all the way to the city. Your father hasn't been well. I cut her off. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood, walked to the small desk in the corner, and picked up a single sheet of paper. I walked back and slid it across the glass. It came to a perfect stop in the center of the table, equidistant from all of them. It was the personal guarantor form for Garrison Restoration, LLC. The one I had seen in Anya's office. The one with my name on it. David leaned in. His forced smile evaporated. What's this? He asked, though he knew exactly what it was. Whose signature is this? I asked. My voice didn't waver. It was a simple question. A technical question. The explosion was immediate. It was a well-rehearsed performance, a 3-part cacophony of denial and attack. Oh, come on, Mel. David was first trying to laugh it off, the sound catching in his throat. It's just paperwork. You know how this stuff is. It's just a formality for the bank. It doesn't even mean anything. I was going to tell you. How dare you? My mother, her voice rising to a shrill peak, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of grotesque theatrical offense. How dare you drag us all the way here to accuse us? To accuse your brother? We are in trouble, Melissa. Real trouble. Your father is sick with worry, and this is what you do after everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we made so you could have this cold gray life. And my father, my dad. He just stared at his hands. He flinched when my mother yelled, his shoulders sinking further into his chest. He said nothing. His silence was the most damning confession in the room. He was the passive enabler, the man who would let his son and wife burn his daughter's life to the ground just to avoid a difficult conversation. I just watched them. I let the wave of gaslighting crash against me. I was a stone wall. I didn't flinch, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I just waited. My silence unnerved them more than any accusation could have. When Karen finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing, I just stared. David cleared his throat, the charming big brother act completely gone, replaced by a raw, desperate urgency. "Look, Mel," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He reached for the manila envelope my father was clutching, pulling it from his weak grip. "Mom's right. We're in a jam, a bad one. I made some mistakes. Okay, I admit it. But it's fixable. It's all fixable." He tore open the envelope and fanned out a thick stack of new, crisp documents across the table. They looked official, terrifying. "This," he said, tapping the top page, "is a new loan. From a different lender, a private one. It's a consolidation loan. It pays off everything." He was talking too fast, his eyes manic. "The line of credit, the second mortgage, all of it. It clears the slate. It saves the house." My mother's voice became syrupy, a venomous, cloying sweetness that turned my stomach. "We just need your signature, honey." She slid one of the pages toward me and pointed to a bright yellow "Sign Here" tab. "You're the only one who can save the house, Melbug. You're the only one with the credit, the income. You can't let this happen to us. You can't let us be humiliated." My father mumbled his first words since he'd walked in. He was staring at the table, his voice thick. "You can't let them throw us out on the street. The whole town. What will people say?" There it was. The real reason. Not the debt. Not the fraud. The shame. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to reload. They had come to my home, presented me with evidence of their first crime, and used it as leverage to get me to sign onto a new one. I looked at the paper. I looked at their three faces twisted with desperation and a terrifying, selfish hope. They were waiting. The Rock was supposed to sign. She was supposed to cave. She always did. I leaned back in my chair. The simple movement made all three of them lean forward. "I can't sign that." The air in the room went thin, sucked into a vacuum. "What?" David's voice cracked. "What do you mean you can't?" My mother snapped. "Of course you can. It's just your name." "I mean I can't." I looked from my mother to my brother to my father, meeting each of their gazes. "I wish I could help. I truly do. But I have nothing." David let out a high-pitched, hysterical laugh. "Nothing? What are you talking about? You live in this place. You've got that job. You're lying." "My accounts are empty," I said. "I'm broke." The effect was immediate. It was like I'd pulled the pin on a grenade and rolled it onto the table. David's face didn't just fall. It caved in. The mask of charm and desperation didn't slip. It shattered, revealing the terrified hollow man underneath. "Broke?" He squeaked, his voice an octave too high. "What do you mean, broke? Your 401k, your savings? That's a lie." My mother's face was a horrifying spectacle. It went from pale white to a blotchy red to a deep, strangled purple. Her eyes, which had been trying to conjure crocodile tears moments before, were now blazing with a pure, unadulterated hatred that I had never seen. "You," she seethed, her voice a low, trembling hiss. You what?" "I'm broke," I said again, my voice as calm and empty as my bank account. "There's nothing to co-sign with. There's no money for the bank to take. It's gone." Karen stood up so fast her chair screeched on the floor and toppled backward, crashing onto the hardwood. The sound was violent, explosive. "You ungrateful bitch!" she spat. The word hit me like a physical slap. You would rather lie and hide your money than save your own family. You would let your father and me be homeless just to spite us. "I'm not lying, Mom." "You will not do this to us," she screamed. She was trembling, vibrating with a rage that seemed to fill the entire room. She slammed her hands on the table. "I will not be humiliated. You think you're so smart. You think you can just cut us off. She grabbed her purse, yanking the strap onto her shoulder. You'll regret this, Melissa. I swear to God you will regret this. She spun her eyes, landing on my father and brother, who were still frozen, staring at me in abject horror. We're leaving, David. Now! David scrambled to his feet, his face ashen, his mind clearly racing, trying to find another angle, another lie, but coming up empty. My father followed, shuffling, his head bowed, a broken old man who had made his choice. My mother stormed to the door and wrenched it open. She looked back at me one last time, her face a mask of pure venom, a stranger I had known my entire life. We're your family! She slammed the door. The echo hung in the cold, gray air. I sat there alone at my glass table, surrounded by their lies. The confrontation was over. The war had just begun. My mother made good on her threat with a speed and viciousness that was almost impressive. The community of Garrison, the one she'd accused me of abandoning, became her chosen weapon. She didn't just twist the knife, she put it on a public broadcast. My phone, which had been silent for a week, began to light up with a new kind of message. Vile texts from numbers I didn't recognize. A 300-word email from our former pastor, Pastor Mike, praying for my cold heart and admonishing me for forgetting the fifth commandment. I saw a Facebook post from a high school acquaintance, complete with a picture of my parents' house. Can't believe Melissa Baker, who we all thought was so smart, is letting her own parents get foreclosed on. Some people forget where they come from. I was a pariah. In a single week, my mother had successfully painted me as a rich, ungrateful, sociopathic city girl who had stolen her family's money, their money, she claimed, and was throwing her poor sick parents out on the street. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. I stole. But the lie was simple, emotional, and easy to digest. The truth was complicated and ugly. In a small town, the simple story always wins. Then the email came. It wasn't to me. It was a forwarded message from Anya. You need to see this. It was a public notice for an emergency town hall meeting at the Garrison Community Center. The subject wasn't me, not directly. It was public discussion on Garrison Restoration, LLC. My stomach clenched. This wasn't my doing. This was the other victims. The families David had scammed, the people whose kitchen remodels he'd abandoned, whose roofs he'd left half-finished. They were organizing, and my name was still legally tied to that LLC. Anya's advice was simple. Don't go. It's a hornet's nest. Let me handle it. No. I'd said, my voice quiet. They're using my name. They're telling my story. I'm going. I'm going to tell the truth. I drove to Garrison on a rainy Tuesday night. I wasn't just a pariah. I was walking into my own public execution. The community center parking lot was full. I parked in the back under a flickering spotlight. I wasn't dressed for a fight. I was dressed for a funeral in a simple black dress and a trench coat. I wasn't carrying a weapon. I was carrying a thick 3-ring binder heavy as a tombstone. When I walked in, the hall went silent. Not a gradual hush, but a sudden violent cutoff of sound. Every head turned. The air was thick with fluorescent light and shared animosity. I saw them all. Mrs. Henderson, who used to give me cookies. The Millers, whose kids I babysat. They stared at me with open, righteous contempt. And then I saw my family. They were in the front row, perfectly positioned. My mother, her face a mask of tragic, brave sorrow. My father slumped in his chair, looking suitably broken and frail. And David? David was actually dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. They weren't there as the accused. They were there as the chief victims, ready to feed the narrative of their ungrateful criminal daughter to the sharks. My mother's eyes met mine across the room. She gave me a look of pure, cold triumph. You're finished, it said. I ignored her. I took a seat in the very back row alone. I placed the binder on my lap. The meeting started. Mr. Henderson, a man whose deposit for a new patio was gone, was leading it. One by one, people stood up, their voices shaking with anger and fear. They told their stories. He took $12,000. He left my kitchen gutted. Our house has a blue tarp for a roof and winter is coming. With every story, I could feel the anger in the room building a static charge. And with every story, my family in the front row looked more and in more pain, as if they too were victims of this faceless monster. Finally, Mr. Henderson looked at his paper. And it says here, the sole guarantor, the partner on this sham LLC is a Melissa Baker. Is she here? Every eye was on me. I stood up. The binder felt heavy in my hands. I'm here. Well, a man shouted from the side. What do you have to say for yourself, you thief? I walked. I walked the long aisle, the sound of my heels, a sharp click-clack on the linoleum, the only sound in the room. I didn't look at my family as I passed them. I got to the podium at the front, the one with the squealing microphone. I set the binder down and opened it. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I was calm. I was clear. And I was utterly devastating. My name is Melissa Baker. I spoke into the mic and my voice, steady and amplified, filled the room. I looked out at the faces so full of hate. That's my family in the front row, and for my entire life I have been their rock. I saw my mother flinch at the word. What I learned 3 months ago, I continued, is that a rock is just something you use. You can use it to build a foundation, or you can use it to throw at a problem. For 10 years, I've been the one they built on. I paid their bills. I saved their house. But when I overheard them in their kitchen 3 months ago planning to make me pay for a debt I didn't even know existed, I realized I wasn't their foundation. I was just the next thing they were willing to throw. A murmur went through the crowd. My mother started to stand up. She's lying. She's hysterical. She stole. I'm not finished, Karen, I said, my voice dropping, the use of her first name silencing her like a gunshot. I turned to the wall behind me where a projector was set up. I pulled a USB from my pocket and plugged it into the town's laptop. You want to talk about stealing? The first image flashed on the wall, the LLC's personal guarantor form. This is my forged signature. The second image, the application for the $80,000 second mortgage. This is also my forged signature. The third, the application for the $150,000 line of credit. And this one. I didn't stop. For 10 minutes I laid it all out. The receipts, the bank statements, the wire transfers. I showed them the LLC's account and I showed them David's personal account. I showed them where their deposit money, their kitchen money, their roof money had gone. A $4,000 payment for David's new truck rims, a $200 bar tab at the Stumble Inn, a series of cash withdrawals at a casino 2 hours away. The room was deathly quiet, the only sound the click of my remote. When I was done, I turned the projector off. The room was plunged back into the harsh fluorescent light. I looked at the crowd. The faces were no longer full of hate for me. They were pale with shock. He didn't just steal from me, I said, my voice raw but strong. He stole from you. He used my name, my credit, and my trust to steal from this entire community. I looked at David. He was as white as a sheet, staring at his hands. My father was openly weeping, a terrible, wet, gulping sound. My mother, her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The victim narrative had just been publicly, violently, and irrefutably dismembered. I am dissolving the LLC, I announced to the room. I have already liquidated every asset tied to my name. My 401k, my savings, my life's work. It's all gone. And it is going to be the only asset of this company. I looked at Mr. Henderson, at Mrs. Henderson, at all of them. And as the legal guarantor, I'm directing the lawyers. The bank doesn't get paid first. My family doesn't get a dime. The only people getting paid back are you. The silence held for 3 seconds. The community's anger, a massive, powerful thing, shifted its target. It turned instantly and completely from me to them. It was Mr. Henderson who spoke first, his voice trembling with a rage that was terrifying to behold. That's fraud. That's criminal. Somebody call the sheriff. 2 weeks later, I was back in Anya Sharma's glass-walled office. The mood was no longer one of frantic triage. It was quiet, sober final. The polished mahogany table was covered in a neat stack of documents, the last will and testament of my old life. Anya, sharp and precise as ever, walked me through the fallout, a verbal autopsy of the life I had just immolated. The district attorney in Garrison's County has moved forward, she said, her voice matter of fact. She slid a document toward me. Your testimony, combined with the evidence from the town hall and the accountant's report, was more than enough. David is facing 3 counts of felony fraud, 2 of aggravated identity theft, and a slew of civil suits. He has been advised to take a plea. I stared at the legal jargon, the words State vs. David Baker, feeling foreign, unreal. And the house. The bank moved for immediate foreclosure, citing the fraudulent second mortgage, Anya said, turning a page. Given the circumstances, and with no one making payments, they seized the asset. The house is gone. It goes to auction in 30 days. I nodded. Just a simple nod. The house I grew up in. The porch light my mom always left on. Gone. It was just a house. It hadn't been a home for a very, very long time. Now, Anya said, her voice softening just a fraction. She turned to the last stack of papers. This one was all spreadsheets, a sea of red and black. Let's talk about you, Melissa. She laid it out. The trust I had created, that digital fortress, had been completely and totally emptied. It had been a massive sum, my entire future, and every penny, as I had directed, had been paid out pro rata to the victims of Garrison Restoration LLC. Every cent of David's theft from the townspeople, the miller's kitchen, Mrs. Henderson's roof, had been made whole. By making the townspeople the priority creditors, Anya explained, you effectively shielded them from the loss. But it means the other creditors, namely the bank with the $150,000 line of credit, are left holding the bag. They're getting, well, essentially nothing. And they can't come after you because you have nothing. She tapped her pen on the final summary sheet. It was my personal balance. To be clear, Melissa, after paying our fees, after zeroing out the trust to cover David's victims, after the tax penalties for the 401k liquidation, this is you. She pointed to a number at the bottom of the page. It wasn't just zero, it was slightly negative. You are 29 years old and your net worth is for all intents and purposes zero. You're starting over, from less than scratch. Was it worth it? I looked at the number. 0. It looked clean. It looked like the first honest number I'd seen in a decade. I thought about the weight I had carried for years, the bone-deep exhaustion of being the rock, the constant humming anxiety of their next emergency. I thought of my mother's face twisted in hatred and my brother's pale with the terror of finally being caught. I thought of the silence in my apartment, a silence that was no longer lonely, but peaceful. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive pen, and my hand was perfectly steady. I signed my name, my real name, on the last document, the one that finalized the dissolution of the trust. I didn't lose my money, Anya, I said, sliding the paper back to her. I spent it, she raised an eyebrow. I spent it on them, I continued, but not for them. I bought my name back. I bought my freedom. It's the best money I ever spent. Anya stared at me for a long moment, a look I couldn't quite decipher, and then she nodded, a small, sharp dip of her chin. Very well, it's done then. I stood up, my purse feeling strangely light on my shoulder. I walked out of her office, out of the silent air-conditioned lobby, and onto the busy Columbus street. The city noise hit me, a bus, hissing, the murmur of a crowd, a distant siren. It was the sound of my life, a life that was now entirely terrifyingly my own. I had my freelance job. I had my apartment, at least for this month's rent. I had my car. And I had 0. I felt like I could fly. I was halfway to my car when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, an unknown number, Garrison area code. My heart didn't just stop, it seized. Them. It had to be them. My mother calling from a borrowed phone. My father calling for one last plea. My thumb hovered over the decline button. The shame, the guilt, the old obligation, it was all there, a phantom limb aching. Don't answer. You're free. Don't answer, I answered. Hello? My voice was tight, cautious. There was a crackle on the line and then a thin, papery voice. Melissa Baker. It wasn't my mother. This is she. Oh dear. This is Ethel Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose roof had been a blue tarp. My breath caught. Mrs. Henderson, is everything okay? Oh yes, dear, yes. I heard her take a shaky breath. I just got a check. From your lawyer, it said, for the whole amount. For my roof. I couldn't believe it. Her voice broke just a little. I'm having the men come tomorrow to fix it. Before the winter. I leaned my head against the cool brick of the building beside me, my eyes squeezing shut. I just wanted to say, after that meeting, all those things your mother said. Well, I just wanted to say I'm sorry I ever thought ill of you. You're a good woman, Melissa. A good woman. I couldn't speak. I just managed a strangled, "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I'm glad. I have to go. God bless you, dear." She hung up. I stood there frozen on the sidewalk as the city rushed around me, a woman in a black trench coat with a $0 net worth. And for the first time since I'd stood in that dark foyer for the first time in what felt like my entire life, I let out a single, ragged sob that was torn from the deepest part of my chest. It wasn't for the money I'd lost. It wasn't for the family I'd severed. It was for the small, simple, profound relief of being called a good woman, and finally believing it was true. Months passed. The shock waves from the town hall quieted, replaced by the grim mechanics of the legal system. David took his plea sentenced to community service and a long probation he was guaranteed to violate. The town made whole by my sacrifice moved on. I worked. I freelance designed logos, restaurant menus, corporate branding guides. I worked until my eyes burned, and my savings account for the first time crawled out of the negative. It was a cold, clear January morning when I drove back to Garrison. I hadn't been summoned. I wasn't expected. I was going for myself a final witness to the end of an era. The courthouse steps were slick with a thin, dirty ice. A small, shivering crowd of about 15 people had gathered. A man in a too-thin suit, the auctioneer stood with a clipboard, his voice a nasal, monotonous drone. He wasn't selling a home. He wasn't auctioning off 29 years of memories, Christmases, and a childhood. He was liquidating asset number 724B. I didn't get out of the car. I sat parked across the street, my heater on full blast, watching the death of my past through the windshield. And then I saw them. They weren't in the crowd. They were on the periphery, standing beside a dented, rust-spotted U-Haul van parked down the block. They looked small. That was the only word for it. The larger-than-life figures who had dominated my world, who had held the power to grant or withhold love, were just two cold, broken old people. My father Mark looked thin, his coat hanging off his shrunken frame. My mother Karen, her hair flat and uncolored, stood with her arms crossed, a lit cigarette dangling from her fingers. Anya had told me they'd been living in a single room at the Garrison Motel 6. The U-Haul, I realized, must hold everything they had left. They were watching the auction, this final public humiliation. My mother's head turned. Her eyes scanned the street, and then, as if drawn by a magnet, they locked onto my car, onto me. I didn't look away. Her face, even from 50 yards, tightened. She dropped her cigarette, grinding it into the slush with her heel, and began walking toward me. She didn't hurry. She just came a ghost marching on her own grave. I watched her cross the street, her old boots unsteady on the ice. She didn't try the handle. She just tapped a sharp, insistent rap, rap, rap of her knuckle against the passenger side window. I pressed the button, and the window glided down with a soft electronic hum. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of her cheap cigarette. Her eyes were hollow, the blazing fire I'd seen in my apartment and at the town hall completely extinguished. There was only a cold, dead ash. "Are you happy, Melissa?" Her voice was a dry rasp. "You came to see the final show." She gestured back at the auctioneer who was calling out a bid. "You did this. You know that, don't you? You destroyed your family. You put your own father out of his home, all for what money?" The old Melissa, the Rock, would have flinched. She would have apologized, defended, justified. She would have been ripped apart by the guilt, by the monstrous injustice of the accusation. I just looked at her. I saw the hollowed-out shell of a woman who had gambled her daughter's life and lost. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel hate. I just felt pity. A vast, empty, cold pity. "I didn't do this, Mom." My voice was quiet, not much louder than the car's humming heater. "I'm not the one who forged signatures. I'm not the one who stole from our neighbors. I'm not the one who took out fraudulent loans." I looked her right in her hollow eyes. "You did this. You, Dad, and David. You built this whole life on lies, and you just assumed I would be the one to pay for it when it all fell apart. That's the only difference. I said no. I paid for my own life, not yours." Her face crumpled, the truth hitting her with a physical force. The emptiness was replaced by a flash of the old familiar desperation. She didn't have any moves left. The anger hadn't worked. The guilt hadn't worked. All that was left was to beg. "Melissa." She reached a hand through the open window, her fingers claw-like. "Karen, don't." My father's voice thin and weak. He had shuffled up behind her, his face gray with cold and defeat. He looked at me, his eyes wet and pleading. The passive enabler, still enabling, still pleading for an easy way out. "Melbug," he whispered, the old pet name, a sickening rotten thing on his tongue. "Melbug, please. We're sorry. Okay? We're so sorry. We've got nowhere to go. David's... He's gone. It's just us. Help us," my mother echoed, her voice cracking. "You're our daughter. Help us." This was it, the final test, the last desperate pull of the toxic bond that had defined my entire life. They stood there, shivering, ruined finally, and completely beaten, asking me to save them one last time. The person I was would have said yes. The Rock would have sighed, opened her wallet, and started the cycle all over again. But I wasn't her. Not anymore. I had bought my freedom, and I wasn't giving it back. I looked at my father, the man who had stood by and watched. I looked at my mother, the woman who had wielded the knife. "I know," I said, and the last bit of fog, the last lingering thread of obligation just evaporated. "No." The word was so simple, so quiet, so final. My mother's face went slack with disbelief. My father actually recoiled as if I'd slapped him. I pressed the button. The window began to glide up, a silent glass barrier rising between us. My mother's face contorted. "You can't!" she shrieked, her voice suddenly finding its old power. She banged her fist on the rising glass, a hollow, frantic sound. "You can't just leave! You can't just leave us here! Melissa, we're your family!" The window sealed shut, cutting off her voice. I sat there for 1 second looking at her, a desperate woman screaming at her own reflection in my window. I put the car in gear. The transmission clicked softly. Watch me, I thought. I pulled away from the curb. I drove past the U-Haul. I drove past the courthouse. I didn't speed. I didn't race out of town. I just drove my eyes on the road ahead. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. I didn't even check the rearview mirror. 1 year later, I'm sitting on my sofa, but it's not the same cold gray room. A massive monstera plant, a vibrant, unruly splash of green, has claimed the corner by the window. A deep blue, chunky knit throw blanket is pooled on the cushions. My walls, once bare, are now covered in framed prints of my own work. Bold, confident designs that I'm proud of. My apartment is no longer a sterile fortress. It's a home. I'm working my laptop warm on my lap as I put the finishing touches on a brand identity package for a new downtown coffee shop. My freelance business, Baker Design, isn't just surviving, it's thriving. My client list is full, my invoices are paid on time, and my work is respected. I close the laptop with a quiet, satisfied click. I'd just transferred a significant portion of my last payment into my new savings account. I'd named it Foundation. It wasn't the six-figure cushion I'd once had, not even close. But looking at the balance, a solid, hard-earned number that was growing every week, I felt a kind of pride I'd never known before. This money was clean. It had no attachments, no secret obligations. It was just mine. My phone buzzes on the coffee table. A year ago, that sound would have sent a jolt of ice-water anxiety through my veins. It was a conditioned reflex, a tightening in my gut that braced for the next emergency, the next demand, the next guilt trip. Now, I glance over at it with just curiosity. The name on the screen is Sarah, a friend, a real one who I'd met at a freelance design meetup, a woman who had no idea who my family was, and who would be horrified if she ever knew the full story. The text reads, "Hey, you free for dinner? That new Thai place just opened. My treat. You killed that coffee shop logo." A smile spreads across my face, easy and genuine. It's a feeling that has become familiar this past year. I type back, "Yes, absolutely." "Savina Hozro, you're a rock star." She replies instantly, "See you then." I stand up, stretching my back, popping. The late afternoon sun streams in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The silence in my apartment is no longer a cold, sterile void. It's a warm, peaceful presence. I think about the word family. For 29 years, that word had been a chain. It meant obligation. It meant sacrifice. It meant a one-way flow of my life, my money, my sanity into a black hole of their dysfunction. It meant being their rock, a thing they used to prop up their collapsing lives, never caring that they were crushing the person underneath. I'm building my own family now. It's Sarah who trades horror movie recommendations with me. It's Anya, my lawyer, who I now meet for a quarterly financial health coffee, a mentor I never had. It's my clients who value my time and my talent. It's a structure I'm building by choice, one based on mutual respect, shared interests, and simple, uncomplicated kindness. I walk to my bedroom to get changed, and I catch my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back isn't the same person. Her eyes are clear. The exhaustion that had settled into her bones for a decade is gone. She's not a rock. Not in their sense, anyway. Growing up, my family always told me I was their rock. It was a heavy thing to be, a heavy, cold thing, and I spent my whole life afraid that if I moved, if I even flinched, I'd let everyone down. I thought it was my job to be still, to be strong, to let them lean on me, to let them take pieces of me, until I was just gravel under their feet. I thought that's what loyalty meant. But I've learned something in this last year, starting from zero. A rock isn't just something you use to hold a door open or to throw at a problem you're running from. It's not just a tool, and it's not just a weapon. A rock can also be a foundation. My name is Melissa Baker. I'm 30 years old, I'm a business owner, I'm a friend, and I started over from nothing. I'm still building, I'm still saving, but this time I'm building my life on a foundation that I laid stone by stone. A foundation of my own making, built with my own hands. A foundation that no one, not my mother, not my father, not my brother, not even the ghost of the family I thought I had, can ever take away from me. This time I'm building it for myself. I grab my keys from the hook by the door. The small, simple jingle is the only sound. I open the door, step out into the hallway, and pull it shut behind me, the lock clicking into place with a solid final sound. And I walk toward the elevator, toward dinner with my friend, toward the life that is finally completely my own. And with that final quiet click of her apartment door, Melissa Baker's old life was truly over, and her new foundation was set. What did you think of the price she paid for her freedom? We read every single one of your thoughts, so leave a comment below. If you appreciate stories like this, be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.